Okay, so today is day 5 of the 67 Steps program, and it's quite late here, so I just finished watching the daily video and also one of the book reviews. Tai was looking at the book called The Millionaire Next Door, so a lot of overlapping themes, so I'll just cover them both together and my thoughts. So the main theme of the day's lesson was what's the difference between rich people and poor people in their actions and behavior and thoughts. And then obviously, what sort of traits are you showing, and that shows you which side you're probably closer to and where you want to move to. Um, so one really thing that hit home with me was he says that poor people worry about things outside of their control, and rich people worry about things under their control. So everyone worries about something, but what you worry about, it says a lot about you. And I found this quite interesting because I think I spend a lot of my time and I kind of go through phases, but I spend a lot of my time worrying about the world and humanity, and then what things could go wrong, and the stock market crashing and recession, and governments spending lots of money and going broke. And I think that you can't give too much attention to that because it's out of your control. So what can you really do about it? You really can't. You got to really focus on what's in your control. And so that's one of the big takeaways from me is I need to spend a lot less time on all that. No more conspiracy theories. It's all, it's just entertainment, and it's just kind of a waste of your energy, of your thought. It takes away from the focus of things you can control. So, things about my business, I need to think about. One of the points he pointed out was single points of failure. If you have any single points of failure in your business, then that's something that you should focus about, because any one thing happens, it could break your business model. And so one thing for me is making sure I don't have too much of revenue coming from a single client, because if that client disappears or something happens, then it's a major shock to your business. So I need to make sure I'm more diversified across my clients, get more clients, diversify the revenue, and that's definitely one thing I'm going to focus on. So I'll come back to some of the notes here. He says rich people seek criticism and ask questions, whereas poor people get offended. So he gave an example of a friend that he had on Facebook, and he tried to give them some advice, and she took offense to what he was saying. But really, he just meant it, to try and help her business. Whereas rich people he spends time around, they often will ask questions, will seek criticism because they want to understand what don't they know. They're always curious, they're always asking questions, and they're always trying to learn and grow. So that's the difference in mentality. Rich people also have discipline, and poor people don't. This could be, in different areas of life, not just wealth, but in health. So the rich people, they have a very fixed discipline and focus. One example he gave was, athletes that he spent time with, watching and observing their patterns. They go to parties, he's watching them, and everyone else is drinking alcohol and eating pizza, and the athletes and the basketball players are just sitting there, eating really good food, not drinking alcohol, and just staying a lot more disciplined and focused. Even though they probably could get away with that, is what he was saying, but that their intention is so strong, and they're just so disciplined, and that's what makes them the top of the game. And so, rich people in health and wealth, you always look how they show discipline, and you can tell a person's outcome by their actions. Whereas poor people tend to, not value money highly, not track how much money they're spending, don't really have the discipline to have budgets. Budgets was one really interesting thing he talked about, and he says that all rich people know their numbers and have budgets, and the poor people don't, because they don't really understand math, understand numbers, or the value of doing that. And so he gave an example of the best way to do that. The most practical way is to look at your monthly costs. Either could be your business or your personal costs, and then to divide that by 30 to get your daily number. So you basically have this daily battle, he calls it, this daily budget, and you can just see, it's much you to see day to day how you're doing, how you're tracking it, and if you're going over, you can kind of see it much more clearly, and it's much more obvious. Okay, I need to stay under this number. So for me, that number comes to around 80 Singapore dollars a day. You take away rent right now, which is quite cheap where I'm staying. It's about $60 a day. So my budget would be $60 a day for food, for entertainment, for shopping, for whatever, transport, and I can just very easily see day to day, am I going over that number or staying under that number? And I think so far, I'm doing pretty good. But obviously, as you move to different countries, that number changes, and also your income might change. So you might have a different number, and need to change and track that month to month. But that's a really, I guess, that's the simplest way of budgeting to make sure that you can hit your numbers. without getting all these complicated financial models, which may take you longer to plan, and you won't really follow it. And if a budget's no good if you're not following it, so this is quite an easy one. I definitely think I can put into plan, and I kind of did that anyways, but I didn't have such intention around why I was doing it, or the importance of it. So that's really important. I think I need to stick with that and make sure I'm following that. Otherwise, you just don't know where the money's going, how you're spending it, and then if you don't have a clear idea of your budget and your numbers, I think it's very hard to develop that mentality of wealth, because you don't have placed enough value on accumulating wealth. So that was a really interesting point for me, is around that discipline and how it applies to budgeting from a wealth perspective. Another point he mentioned was that poor people tend to offer their advice and their opinions unsolicited, especially in areas where they don't have experience. So people might like to rant about politics, or rant about the government, or rant about all kinds of things they see in the news, and especially they may get fired up about they watch something on the news or read a newspaper, and they just get swayed by some opinion, some editorial, some piece, and they think they have some expert knowledge to offer you, and then they'll come and just talk their mouth off. Whereas rich people tend to reserve their comments, and really don't just spout from the mouth. It's like verbal diarrhea, I guess. So that's definitely something I think I've seen. I've noticed that people just tend to talk and talk and talk, and often don't know what they're talking about. So you can think about how much time you want to spend around these people, and how much weight you want to give to their opinion. Because if they don't have years of experience, it's not their industry, then what do they really know? And you should never seek financial advice or business advice from someone who doesn't have a really kick-ass business, who's not really successful in that area. So that's something to take away. Let me see what else he put here. He gave an example that the Amish, he spent time with the Amish people, are very rich in terms of their understanding of the social dynamics of raising a family. He gave an example that most kids in Western raised families are just spoiled brats, and you'll see them go into a shop and just kick a big fuss, and they completely misbehave, and the parents don't really know how to handle that. But he says that kind of starts from very young, that they train their kids. If they're praying at the table for dinner or something, the kid reaches up to grab some food, the mother will just flick the kid's hand, and it's not like painful, but it's just a very simple corrective behavior, and they kind of use that from very young to reinforce and train a kid. And again, it's that kind of discipline. You train them from young, so then the children grow up very well behaved, very well disciplined, and they don't have to use violence. It's very rare, he said. So that's kind of interesting. Another way to look at richness. It's not just about money all the time, or even health, but that kind of the richness of a family, raising a family well. So that's definitely good advice for me. Probably later on. And so he says you need to know how to discriminate against dumb ideas and dumb people. So again, that's like unsubstantiated or inaccurate information. And rich people know how to do this. They can very easily read people and understand where is this information coming from. Do they really know what they're talking about? And just discount it and just discriminate against that kind of information. So you're not wasting your time, and also not getting misled by people who don't really know what they're talking about. So I'm going to move on down and some more notes I took. He talks a little bit about memes, which are like ideas. Memes are like mental genes that are passed down from your parents, from teachers, reinforced in society, and they kind of spread like an idea spreads through society. And so he says, do you want to be spreading memes that are moving society forward? Because obviously that's the best, that's the idealistic way to live. And one quote he mentioned was, I never had an original idea in my life. I just go to where smart people are and accumulate their knowledge. So you need to look at the memes that are being put out by really smart people, and just kind of incorporate these observations and patterns into your own life. So you don't need to come up with everything yourself. You just look at how the smart people lived, how the wealthy people, the rich people, the healthy people have lived. What are the memes they live by? What are the sort of rules or patterns they live by? And what can you learn from that? And how can you do that? So he says you have to listen and observe like a machine. Know how to assimilate and accumulate these memes from the right people. And basically this whole program, this whole 67 steps is made up of all the observations he's made, over the course of his years, and he's passing them on in the program. So you can look at it that way, and that you're always trying to learn and accumulate the right memes, and discount the memes that are just like rubbish and just don't mean anything. I think there's a lot of hang-ups people develop about wealth, especially from from their parents, from their peers, from society, the whole poverty mentality. So Vishen Lakhiani, who runs Mind Valley, he calls these rules. These are just bullshit rules we tell ourselves, and they don't really have any meaning or outside of the meaning we give them. So it's not like a law of physics. It's just something that's been invented and it's been passed down, and you kind of pick it up from someone, you don't know where it came from, and it can really hold you back in life. And so this meme is like it's like a virus. You have to be careful which viruses you take on, which ones you incorporate, and which ones are holding you back, and you don't even know they're there because it's running like a subconscious program in the back of your mind. So this is very powerful. It ties into a lot of other people I've followed and listened to. And he says that riches, this is Tai again, he says riches in different areas of life is relative. So you look at your friends and your relatives, and everyone's going to be naturally stratified across this spectrum. So some of your friends will be healthier, and some of your friends will be unhealthy, some of your friends will be wealthy, some of your friends will be less wealthy. So you basically want to seek out and find the ones that are smart in those areas, smart in health, smart in wealth, and observe what they do that works for them, ask them questions, and making sure you're seeking knowledge from people that actually have the expertise and actually know what they're talking about. Even if they're not millionaires and billionaires, if they're ahead of you, then they probably have some knowledge that you can benefit from. And so it's really about learning how to spend time around the right people, and spending less time around people that don't really have the traits and the habits that you want to take on in your life. Some other advice that he gives is, don't worry about the end game goal, just keep up the progression and momentum, because there's never really an end game. If you have this destination in mind, I want to reach this point, then once you reach that point, you always have another goal, a bigger goal, and so it's like a mirage. It keeps moving further ahead of you. You're never going to really reach that end game goal, because as humans we always want to keep learning and progressing. So as long as you can see that you have progression and momentum in your in your life, you can see you're evolving, you can see you're growing, you're learning more every day by day, then that progression and that momentum is what's going to make you successful, and that consistency in developing. And some people, like he says, example he gave was that people that get a formal education, is that there's a correlation study, they actually end up earning less money than those super wealthy people who maybe didn't have an education. And he thinks, his theory is that maybe that's because people are lazy and they rest on their laurels. When doctors get their degree, they've gone through 10 years of medical school, and so they've put so much weight into the value of their education that they kind of just rest on that. And so if you're not consistently learning and consistently growing, no one's going to care that you went to medical school 10 years ago. That doesn't put any more money in your bank. It's what you do every day. It's what you keep doing. It's what how much you're improving as to what the results you'll see. So that was very interesting, and it's good approaches to, I think the other takeaway that's linked to that is that people are always worried about where they're going to get to, and they kind of postpone their happiness. This is very common with entrepreneurs. I've had this problem myself. You have this kind of expectation of a future result or a future outcome, and that's your kind of goal, and you put everything into that, and it's this anticipation you have of how happy you're going to be when you reach this event, and so you kind of sacrifice everything for that goal, and you forget how to appreciate life day by day, and you forget how to find happiness and meaning in day by day, because you haven't achieved that goal yet. You suddenly tell yourself, I can't be happy, or you beat yourself up because you haven't reached that goal. But you really need to learn how to balance that, so that you have appreciation and gratitude for all the things that you already have in your life. So I'm kind of switching to that point for a second. One way I thought was quite useful to look at it was he calls what's called the reverse gap. This is Vishen again. He says the reverse gap is basically look where you were 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and all the things that you've learned since then, and you'll see, okay, look, I've actually progressed quite a lot. And so you in that perspective, you can see, okay, I'm moving in the right direction, I'm learning, I'm growing, and you can be grateful for that. And that's a way of looking at it without looking forward into the future and thinking of this goal and being unhappy because you haven't reached it yet. So that kind of links to Ty's point. One bit of advice he gives is, avoid the trap of knowing in advance what the advice is that you think you want to hear and receive. So he says you might be surprised when you go to these successful people and you ask them the questions. It's not always just the inspirational quotes that you might expect to hear about what success is, how you get it, but there may also be like a dark side that you don't like. Especially, he says, if you look at billionaires, some of the ones in the world today are actually quite aggressive how they get their wealth. There's very few billionaires who haven't been aggressive, and maybe you don't want to be like that. You don't want to be so aggressive and just pursue, super mega wealth, because it's not really your goal. So maybe you don't need that to be happy. Maybe you can be happy with a few $1 million, just have really really nice level of independence and freedom, and that will be enough for you, and you don't have to be so aggressive. So you got to be prepared for the real world, and the answers you might find are not always the ones in the textbooks, in the self-help books about success and how you get it. And you should always want to seek the truth instead of feel good. And so you've got to kind of balance that real world with sometimes what you read in the books, and look at both sides. It's not always black and white. So he set this question for people to think about in the day's class, and it was, what is one example of a profound lesson that you've learned with rich people versus poor people? And this could be in health and in wealth. And so I think that, think of a rich person and what's the lesson you've learned from them. The first person that came to my mind was one of these mentors that I had in the past. This guy called John DeMartini, who is basically like a speaker and a philosopher. I went to a couple of his courses in London quite a few years ago, but it's always stuck with me because of the value and the passion I could see he was giving. He was talking with, and how he applied it to all these areas of life. So Tai's course is quite straightforward. He talks about health, wealth, love, and happiness, how you rate yourself, where you are now, where you want to be, how do you get to that level. So it's very, very practical, and I like that. John DeMartini's approach is quite similar. He has these different 7 levels of life. So it's financial, it's social, it's familial, he's just very similar ways of looking at it, but these are all areas of your life that you have to master. And he says that any area of your life that you don't master, someone else will master for you. So for example, if you don't learn how to master money and financial wealth, then someone else will either scam you, or they'll sell you a bad loan, the bank will get you into debt, you'll take on a bad mortgage, you'll suddenly find yourself trapped with bills and debt and all that stress. So this can be in any area. If you sacrifice your health, you might end up eating fast food because it's just convenient, it's quick. You end up eating pizzas at McDonald's, and then 20 years later, look where you are, you've lost your health. So it's really about understanding. People say to focus on your strengths, but at the same time, if you don't focus, or you're not aware of where your weaknesses are, they can also hurt you. And it can sometimes be a very slow process. Like, you don't gain 100 pounds, overnight, even in a year, but maybe 5 years, 10 years of that kind of lack of awareness, it can really hurt you. And I see it all the time. There's successful people that are just unhealthy, and how can they enjoy life? I wouldn't want to trade for what they have. So that's one lesson I learned, is about the mastery and knowing that what you don't master will master you. And maybe you can, team up with someone in your partner, or your life partner or business partner. You can team up with someone who is strong in those areas, because then you complement each other and you can look out for each other. So it's not that you have to necessarily be strong in every area, but at least be aware of the areas where you need help. And often that's why, Tai mentions it's very common that single business founders just run by one person, the chances of them succeeding are much lower than companies run by 2 or more people. And that's why all kinds of programs like Startup Chile won't accept people if they only have one person as a founder. They just use that statistic and discount the possibility of them succeeding. So that's quite interesting for me, because at the moment I run the business by myself, and I had this kind of real control problem, and maybe it's a trust thing about letting other people into the business. Maybe I haven't found a business partner that I think is as committed to the business as I am. I think it's true that no one's as committed to your own success as you are, so you got to find someone that's really got a lot of skin in the game, and they can also bring something to the table that you don't have, and is really complementing that relationship, so that you're not being having any area of your life mastered by someone that you don't know, or someone that you don't trust. That's quite interesting. That's quite important. Is to look for those allies that can really complement what you have, and also you bring value to them. And so that's what I'm going to think about, is looking for these people that are maybe really strong in the areas that I'm not so strong in, and how can I come to them with a win-win value proposition. So that if I can't master the skill myself, at least I have a really trusted ally in that area. So that's a really profound lesson. There's tons of more stuff by John DeMartini. That's just one of the ones that came to me that I wanted to share. And then coming back to the video, so this is actually one of the book reviews I went through just now. It was, let me get it up here. It was Tai talking about the investment secrets of the ultra wealthy. So this is The Millionaire Next Door, and I think some of the points I touched on. But he kind of breaks it down to all these numbers and metrics and things you should track and should know. And it's the stuff that I haven't given a lot of weight to. Tai mentions that he was a certified financial planner, and so he obviously has a lot more background and experience to talk around these numbers. I haven't put as much focus or thought into learning all these numbers, but he just kind of gave some examples of rich people versus poor people. One example was looking at your net value. So take away your assets when against your liabilities. You look at your net value. Some interesting ratios between rich people and poor people in terms of the money they pay themselves as a salary, so what their taxable income is against their net worth. If that ratio, so the rich people, for them that ratio is 6%, which means they are not taking out more than 6% of the net worth of their business as a salary, which is taxable income, and most people take out way more than that. So 40-50%. He says doctors sometimes take out upwards of 90%, and they end up even though they're earning a lot of money, they're getting taxed on so much of it that the wealth doesn't accumulate as fast as it should, because I guess in America especially, personal tax is a lot higher than corporate tax, and if you don't realize the income, it doesn't get taxed. So if you leave it in the business, you won't get taxed the same way as if you pull it out and live off that. So I guess for rich people, that's learning how to live frugally, within 6%, 7% of their net worth, or if they have a certain lifestyle they want to maintain, then you need to learn how to double your net worth and keep your lifestyle at the level it is, so that you keep that ratio. So my situation in Singapore is a little bit different, because the tax rates for personal tax and corporate tax, it's not so important, that ratio, but I thought that was quite interesting. It still makes a lot more sense. You don't want to pull everything out of your business and use it to live on. You want to find a way to grow your business and live frugally within your means. So that was one interesting metric to look at, is how much of your net worth of your business and your assets. So you can include your house and your car and other cash assets, but your whole net worth value, what's the percentage of that you're using, taking out as your salary every year, and what you're getting taxed on. And then the other one was there's a calculation, a formula involving your age. You should just watch the video, but using your age, you can work out what ratio you should have of your net assets to your earning power. So some kind of complicated equations there. It's a lot easier when you follow the video. I can't do it justice, but it's quite interesting to know that rich people put a lot of weight in this information. And then one funny thing he mentioned was that he's got a lot of different business partners across the spectrum of wealth, but obviously even the poorest business partner he has is worth a lot of money, and then up to the billion number. And he says that in these areas of wealth where you need to invest yourself, you have these different sort of 5 pillars. So you have investments, you have estate planning, you have retirement planning, you have taxes, you have insurance. And he says if you ask someone at the high end of this wealth spectrum anything about any of those 5 areas, they will be able to tell you everything, and they know everything. He never finds a billionaire who he says, what's a trust? And the guy's like, I don't know what's a trust. So I thought that was quite funny the way he explained it. And as you go further down the spectrum, people know less and less and less about all those areas. And even having knowledge in all but one can really cripple you. And he goes through one by one and gives some examples from his personal life and kind of anecdotes, but how if you don't have an awareness of taxes, you can get hit by taxes even though you do everything else right. If you don't have an awareness of insurance, you can do everything else right, save lots of money, and get knocked out by one major illness, one major accident. So really, lack of awareness, lack of knowledge can really hurt you. And so I think, looking at those 5 pillars there, I knew a little bit about each, but not much. And so probably I need to pick up some books and go to some seminars. He said, you just look for seminars in areas on taxes, on inheritance, retirement seminars, and just go to do everything. So yeah, obviously the trick is to keep learning, keep reading, and that's why we're on the program. So today was a lot of information to take in, and yeah, I'll be back tomorrow with more information.